This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels with Ibis Valdes.
Hey,
How are you doing
everybody.
tonight?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
So, wanted to well, thank you for being on the show for the first time. We like to let everybody know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly podcast channel, and within a couple hours, this podcast will be there as an audio podcast. Code Ghost, and you get 1 month free premium subscription, so you can stop scrolling and start listening. Again, this podcast will be on Newsly later tonight. Again, thank you for being on the program. We do want to mention we have a LinkedIn link that's up there for URL. For those of you who are only listening, we're going to actually spell it out. www.linkedin.com/in/IBIS, IBIS -VALDES. And if people go there, what do they find?
No, so when you go to my LinkedIn page, you're going to find just a resume of what I've done with my career thus far in regards to advocacy, in regards to some of my professional achievements as it pertains to politics, civic engagement, advocacy, and most importantly, a way to keep in touch. So if you want to reach out by email or send me a message, hit me up.
So, like you're one of the titles I have is pop culture, social justice, and women's leadership development. These are areas that you are focused on. So, I guess if at the beginning, maybe we tell your story and how you got into these areas for advocacy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ever since I was very young, I was always attracted to, like, without even being aware of like women's rights movements, just naturally what, stories that resonated with me. I loved reading stories about women being able to overcome challenges, being able to come into themselves. Everyone always enjoys like, the nice fairy tale. I certainly, honestly, I don't push those completely aside. But it's nice to know that women, are very much capable of being full members of society and having their own dreams and their goals and their purposes. So then when I grew up, so I'm originally from South Florida, from Miami, I decided to take my studies up to Boston. That was always a dream of mine since I was 15. I went to Northeastern University. So if you're a fellow Husky, hit me up. And there I was I found myself in the midst of, this is 2011, 2012. There was a lot of conversations taking place about women's empowerment on college campuses. In particular, if people recall, 2011, 2012, this is when there was a lot of scandals coming out in regards to prestigious universities that were using their prestige in order to shield particularly athletes or other students of interest from due process if they were being accused of physical or sexual assault. So I was part of those grassroots conversations. I organized with fellow students, and we ended up, several of us were chosen to be interviewed for a documentary now called The Hunting Ground. So this was then 2013. I was very much still in college. But I was very glad to share my experience, my perspective on these issues, especially being that this is not a partisan issue. This is not about demonizing men either. This is just about how can we create an environment where you can go to school, you can study, you can work towards your career without fear of, being harassed, being assaulted, and that there is no even due process for yourself or the person that you're accusing to go through. It's like you just want to feel that, God forbid something like that happens and you choose to, place a report, that there is the option to move forward. Because this option, depending on who you decided to accuse, was not even available to you to begin with, just through all these like shady, tricky measures and whatnot, that many institutions, not just colleges, but even places of employment, that they use to suppress and to manipulate statistics of how often these reports are intercepted. So after that, I figured that the documentary was just going to be like something super indie, like third page of Netflix, that kind of thing. And lo and behold, it caught the attention of Lady Gaga just several years after that. And she felt so compelled and very moved by the content of the documentary, the work a lot of us had put in to hold our universities accountable, and the waves that this was beginning to create in the larger culture, right? And so
Yeah.
Lady Gaga, decided to contribute a song to the documentary. And then that catapulted the hunting ground to a
Yeah.
whole new level. Yeah, absolutely. And so then in 2016, turns out that the song was nominated for an Academy Award. So that placed, the documentary, the theme of it, all of us, all of a sudden on a global stage. And what else can you do in that moment except really, not just defend the work that you did, but really be able to just spread it beyond our individual circles of influence and really share it with the world, especially with, because love or hate the Oscars, the fact is that you know about it. It is
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
is. It's a
Yeah.
huge pop culture moment. It's a huge global moment. So that was an incredible opportunity to be able to be part. I mean, just one of the moments in my life that I'll never forget. Then Vice President Joe Biden also decided to make an appearance as well. So it was a really nice joining of, the public sector, pop culture, private sector, everyone just coming together in order to acknowledge how important of a movement this was, how important of a topic it was to discuss. And then lo and behold, just a year later, that's when Me Too really blew up. Yeah. So I really would like to think that I was part of laying that foundation for what would become Me Too
Yeah. You're
a year.
like a
Mm-hmm.
preliminary piece of the Me Too movement, like a kind
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
core event. So
Mm-hmm.
showing that the vibe of it existed before it fully became identified as Me Too. That is maybe like a, maybe the origins of the movement, at least the idea of it getting support from Biden and Lady Gaga. Like if you get VIP support of a
Yes.
cause, and it draws more attention to it, and that's like you didn't think you were ever going to get that beyond like the third page of Netflix, and then you
Yeah,
get into
I
the
wasn't
higher.
just okay, cool. I'm gonna have to tell you about it so that you can find it. I thought it would have, as sometimes these kinds of works tend to be like limited to a particular audience, kind of niche. Something certainly
Mhm.
really cool to be
I get
part
that.
of, but the way that it just like took off was truly very unexpected, very astounding to me. And all I can say is, damn, I'm glad.
Yeah, well, that's really important because a lot of times if you're in the marginalized communities, and I can understand that. I was, I'm an African American, and I was at a school like a Bowdoin College, and I
Mm.
saw this kind of behavior with the frat kind of community, and eventually
Uh,
a lot of us the frats got pushed out of Bowdoin, because there was a lot of bad behavior associated with that, and it had been going on for decades, right? And it was a lot of like people who were at a certain level
yeah.
that did prevent um, anybody from knowing what incidents were happening in that kind of community. It was kind of like this boys' club that didn't
Hmm.
want to and in that environment, and not really being of that environment. I'd gone to public school, so I had never been to like Pinkerton academies or the big places. That kind of behavior had been going on for these kids before they even got there. And I just was like, I was aligned with the women's point of view because I was kind of in a marginalized community myself. And
You're so
I really felt that that was important to actually point out that the protection they were giving each other was not cool
Yeah,
for the
because
things that they.
I know that this definitely like it lit a very necessary spotlight, not just onto collegiate sports and like athletic culture and how toxic that can be, but I know that fraternities, sororities also were put under a lot of scrutiny as
Yeah.
well. I mean, if you ask me personally, in my college experience, I did not join a sorority, so actually Northeastern did not have housing
Hmm.
for sororities or fraternities. I know some universities preemptively they deny housing to those organizations flat out. I think just to avoid, of course, any kind of liability. I think from a business perspective, it certainly makes sense. But I know that other people have gotten a lot out of the fraternity sorority experience. And if you ask me personally, even though I did not join a sorority, I'm not mad at the concept of sororities or even fraternities existing. I think that for many people, especially like if you are like first generation college student, for example, like, I mean, my family, there's mixed levels of education. So for instance, like, oh, my grandparents did go to college, they did specialize themselves. My parents didn't get to finish college. I'm the first one in the US to have gone to and finished college here. So, it is a great responsibility. What is like your legacy, what those first steps that you take being in that position certainly set the trend for those that come after you, right? And it's I don't believe very rarely, just in a black and white approach to things. I think that there can be, especially, what I mean to say, circling back, is that if you are especially someone who's like first generation to step foot on a college campus, you don't have the privilege of like having had a legacy and already like and a reputation at not just a school but some organizations that precedes you, and you're the first one to, you want to take advantage of as many organizations and opportunities as possible. And like, and frat and sorority life is certainly part of that. So that's something that personally I would advocate for, like eliminating them altogether, but just like how can they be regulated better? How can universities not turn such a blind eye to like really bad like hazing practices, of course sexual harassment, sexual assault, like and even death. That's the thing, is that it's like people even
that's the problem.
they like really, really messed up stories about hazing, episodes that go like way out of bounds. And then at the end of the day, you have a kid that over drank himself to death, like through alcohol poisoning, among other stupid things. So, I think the better conversation to have is not to ban them, but rather just how to regulate them better, how to make sure that everyone adheres to a certain standard of behavior and compliance, so that everybody has a really great, safe experience while they're taking advantage of everything college life has to offer.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, I had been a member of a frat, but the whole issue had been is like I think they couldn't figure out how to regulate them, so they just got rid of them. So it was kind of like throw the whole thing out because of a bunch of incidents of people getting hurt.
Right.
And so they ended up, it ended up being that kind of thing. And I do understand the approach of like, if you think about like a lot of the historical black colleges have very significant sororities and fraternities that help with your development in business and life in the future. So you don't want to, negate that part of being in a frat or sorority. But when you have the bad behavior, the hazing, the sexual harassment, assaults, that's the part that I think was the problem, that they couldn't figure out how to deal with it in a more less black and white way of just getting rid of it. But
right, exactly. The thing is that it's like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like, why is it that whatever good experiences you can get, whether it be like from networking, lifelong relationships, connections, especially like, as with the job market being so, difficult, really since 2008, honestly. I mean, it's been rough for many of us out there. So like, why cut off the legs of something that could really help certain students if they choose that experience, like to succeed, you want to be sensitive to that, but absolutely. I mean, like, especially you as a man, I'm curious to hear, from your perspective, like what were some of like the toxic behaviors that you witnessed? Like, what were things that made you acutely uncomfortable? Obviously as comfortable as you feel sharing, but I mean, it is part of the conversation.
I think it was it was what they kind of call rape culture, that I actually saw the really bad behavior of people who felt they were entitled.
Yeah.
And like I said, I came from public school and I never seen that, right? I never seen, some of these kids have been in private schools because their parents put them out of the house right away. So they were living in this world where they didn't have a lot of parental supervision, and they started making their own rules, and they created their cliques, and they had, some of these people were powerful people, the sons and daughters of executives, of politicians, of very powerful people. And they just felt like they could do whatever they wanted. And coming from a different kind of social background, I was like amazed at their kind of bad behavior in terms of, like I said, the kind of sexual assault, binge drinking, hazing, people getting hurt. And what I didn't like about it is I understood all the things they told me about when I first joined my frat, about how it would give me social connections and business and help me there. But what I saw was like a lot of bad behavior. And I'm like, well, I don't even, I was in it for like 6 months. And then I had a friend, a woman friend, who actually was on the receiving end of the bad behavior. And her story, I just totally believed her. And then I saw these people trying to denigrate her and actually publicly humiliate her. And I just didn't stand with that point of view. I just like I don't stand with that. And so I just right off the bat I got a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't like it.
No, of course not at all. And so the thing is, and it is interesting. I really appreciate like your perspective that you automatically identify, like, even though me as a man, I was in this environment, but I didn't like a lot of the behavior, the toxicity that was going around. And so, so I have my thoughts on this, but I would love to hear just from you as a man. It's like I get, in my work, I have been demonized a lot for trying to, like, all I'm doing is just antagonizing men. Now men can't say anything to women in the workplace or at school because God forbid we have to walk on eggshells now. Like, how do you feel as a man when you hear things like that about the kind of activism that women like myself do?
I just don't. I totally believe it's a similar kind of like as an African American guy, I hit a
Yeah.
glass ceiling. I get people, that question my credentials, say I was there kind of affirmative action.
Okay.
They say condescending things. Like they treat
Mhm.
me in similar ways of actually being in that kind of marginalized group where you're not really part of the group unless you totally go all in. And I saw
Mhm.
people who looked like me actually, because they were jocks or because they were like athletes or whatever, decide to go and be on the in crowd
Right.
and basically say that the bad behavior wasn't bad, right? Because they want the benefit of being in that.
Mhm.
And I just decided I don't want to be that type of guy, right? I don't want to be the kind of guy that feels that that people are lower than them, because what I found was there was a behavior where it was women or other people who were in groups other than them, multiple like different religion, different ethnicity, just not treating people with respect. And we're all
Right.
human beings. And if you come into it where you think somebody's lower than you or somebody doesn't deserve respect, I just think that's a bad place to start. And I don't care how you want, if you get upset at the person who points it out. I don't
Mhm.
agree. It's like if we happen to point out a truth, it's a truth, right? And whether you have the honesty to believe it or to be able to deal with the truth, that's your problem. In my opinion, I don't think it's a problem for a woman or any group, whether in different people with sexual orientation. If people are not giving them a just uh, place to be, a safe place to be, if they're doing things that make them feel uncomfortable, I don't think it's right.
No, of course not. Of course not. So that basically that's something that it really just speaks to your core. Like, you don't have to be a man just to feel that, like, what's wrong is wrong.
Yeah,
Hurting someone else, abusing of your power to subjugate someone else. Because I think the only thing that women and just people are asking for, people who resonate with this movement, you don't have to be exclusively a woman. I know most of us are women, because just when you look, statistically, disproportionately, we are the ones that are most affected. But really, anyone. It's just a matter of, it's not that, because I think there is a very big reactionary backlash where, oh well, now we can't say anything, we just can't even look at your direction, we can't look at you, we can't touch. It's like, okay, it's not that either. You're just making this
too much.
difficult
Yeah.
on purpose. The only thing that we're asking for is, for example, if we are coworkers, it's probably uncomfortable if you make passes at us or make certain comments about our physicality, whatever, because hey, we work together, like, try to have that in mind. Or if you're my boss and I'm relying on you for my salary, my performance review, XYZ, it's also going to be uncomfortable if you're hitting on me or trying to make a move on me. And that it's respect doesn't mean having to stand from here to 50 feet away from us. It just means, like, when you're interacting with us, just have some consideration for the repercussions of
Yeah.
certain decisions you can make when interacting with people like us.
Well, I think you got
That
to look at everybody as like everybody can contribute, right? And if you're only measuring, the opposite sex in terms of like if you're the boss and you're always trying to date the women on your team, and that's not actually respecting their ability, right?
yeah,
That's
exactly.
not,
It's not.
you know,
No, it's not.
that's not
It's not.
it's not a
And it's
respectful thing to do, and I don't think it's okay for you to do
and it's questioning also the
it
larger culture of, like,
just because
how
you've done it.
Just because you've done it doesn't mean you
Power
can continue
dynamics. Yeah.
doing it. So there's like a very big reckoning.
Yeah. Just for
Because
generations, you've been able to have that. Yeah. That power
Mhm.
dynamic for generations has existed, right? Where certain people were able to feel like they could do it. And then when you take away that, people get resentful, right? Because
Yes.
it was an unwritten rule and they were able to get away with it. And now suddenly you're holding them to it. And then always a hard time. Remember, I mean, I was in the kind of class of kids that, busing was involved, right? And
Yeah.
they didn't like to see us because, oh, that we didn't have to see you before. And it feels like there are a lot of parallels in that kind of situation if you think about it, because people didn't have to respect us.
No.
They actually could get away without respecting us. And so the idea of respect is across the board in the society, which people who are in the kind of maligned groups that didn't get respect, and then suddenly the law says you have to do it, or the morality of the culture changes, and now you have to look at everybody in terms of like the content of their character and who they are, like Dr. King said. So if you're
Yeah.
doing that, you're not doing the other thing.
I think also like something else to consider is that yes, even though like for example, a lot of people who get frustrated, in our camp of things, they say, oh, but we're in the 21st century, we're in, be it 2016, 2020, 20, but when you look at like the span of human history, like I'm sure, for example, from like the Black civil rights perspective, right? Like um, the first little Black girl that went to an integrated school, I think she's only like in her 60s or 70s. Like a lot of history
Yeah,
that
it's
we
not a lot of
think,
time. Yeah, it's not a lot of
it's like
time.
a lot of history that we think is super ancient is actually not. Like back in the 1960s, which is like when, let's say, like like my mom was born in 1963, which is again not super far away from us. Like people were drinking from different water fountains. People were sitting in different sides of the bus. Like white to the front, Black people to the back. Like I think some people also, and I'm talking like on my side of the camp, like people really take for granted that a lot of very rapid social progress has taken place in relatively very little time. Like the fact that I think it was up until like the 1970s, 60s or 70s, where, and I see this quoted very often, women could not take out a line of credit without their husband's permission.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. People were not given the latitude that you could consider like an independent person. You were tied to your husband, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of idea. My father made the decision as a businessman back in the 70s to live in a primarily white suburb. And so we ended up being kind of like a busing issue to the people in that neighborhood because normally they would never have had a black person in the class at all. And
Right.
then they had three black young men from our family with three boys, and we were
Wow.
there. Did not know how to deal with us at all. It's like 1972 outside of Boston in a town called Stoughton, and they did
Oh,
not know how to
yeah.
deal with us at all.
Oh, wow. So you see how it's like
So I mean, I kind of grew up in a situation where they did not. Yeah, it's not that far ago. I'm talking about like
it
1972,
is not that far ago.
1974. I'm
Like,
a child of the 70s. I'm 55 years old.
oh my
And
God.
I see
So,
parallels where
mhm.
my young daughter in New Hampshire was walking down the street and somebody yelled the N-word just because she's walking down the street. And I felt like brought back to 74 where I went to school. Somebody told me to go back to Africa. I still remember that. My first day at kindergarten, some kids and their parents told me to go back to Africa when I'm an African American. So I mean, so the idea that this is old or we've advanced is like for my daughter to walk down the street in New Hampshire to be told the N word, not
Mhm.
that the problem we have is that people don't respect people, and
No.
their comfort zone is to continue to disrespect, and I just
Mhm.
won't stand for somebody's comfort zone to be able to disrespect. So I
Right,
totally
exactly. So you
agree with
see
you.
how wild the perspective is that like, even though I think a lot of us may have very high standards as you should, like let's like in my intrapersonal relationships, like people within as Brene Brown says, like your square squad, if you had a very tiny little like post-it, right? And you were able to fit only as many names, who would be the people that you really trust around you, like friends, very close family, your square squad, like people who I love very close to me. Of course, like I do demand really that, hey, like I would really appreciate if we could have the same morals, the same values to an extent. I mean, because your politics to a very large extent do reflect your morality and your values. And like, you know, I would rather be on the same page than different.
Mhm.
And so that being said, we also do, like, as a country, we also do need to give ourselves a lot of grace in the fact that, like, we have the culture has advanced unevenly, I would say, overall. Where, like, you know, and this is just the course of history. You take 5 steps forward to take 3 steps back, but then another 4 steps forward to take 1 step back. Like, big picture, we are advancing overall, but it's not always the most linear progress. You know, you're going to see like up and down and up and down. So
Mhm.
to say that we've gone from an analog world in the 60s and 70s, right? Like, with everything that we just discussed, certain social conditions, sorry, laws that were put into place, and then, you know, to move super fast through the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, Y2K going into like the 2020s, like, we have jumped in leaps and bounds, at least as far as the US is concerned, in terms of like what the public generally sympathizes with, and like what the public expects in regards to like social norms and etiquette and justice and whatnot. But if we're seeing a really big backlash, it's also because of the fact that we have advanced so rapidly that, like, there are people that either have not caught up or will not catch up because they don't want to. And so
Mhm.
it's also being realistic about just where we're at and how long it's really going to take for certain attitudes to really cement themselves properly. Um, but that's where I, you know, I just try to give myself grace, and I try to put into perspective, like, if I'm running into situations, people, contexts where they're just not receiving well, like, who I am or what I've done. It's like, again, you know, I was born to parents that didn't even, you know, like, in a world where the internet did not exist, in a world where like women's rights, the way that we're talking about it so casually now, was just non-existent, you know. So it's
Wouldn't
also, it's keeping that into perspective. um and then I guess, like, switching gears a little bit, I mean, going back really specifically to, you know, like the crux um of my activism in regard to women's empowerment, intrapersonal, you know, relationships, and leadership development, and all that, is that, I mean, a big part of, I guess, going back to the culture, like you said, rape culture. I haven't heard that term, honestly, in a long time. I think really 2016, 2017 was the last time, you know, I've heard it discussed like so fervently. There was a time where I did get a lot of certain like op-eds published. What was really interesting is I would get rather liberal opinions published in very conservative places. So just the fact that I was able to like bridge, you know, to whatever extent I could, I thought, you know, that was really another very interesting part of my career, is that, like, at least I try to speak to universal values. I guess, like, on paper, you can pin me down as I'm a, you know, liberal to progressive on many issues. In the US, I am a voting Democrat.
Mhm.
But really, in terms of my values and who I am and what I exercise on a day-to-day basis, not just when I vote, um, is just values that help to lift everyone, values that help to work for everyone, not just people in my camp or in my party or in, you know, my activism groups. And so, actually, one of my favorite op-eds that I'm glad it got placed in the Washington Examiner. I don't. Do you recall, like, I know that, you know, Harvey Weinstein, like, he was everywhere. The way that he abused all kinds of
Yeah, yeah,
actresses, you know, very high profile
yeah,
victims of his abuse. But then, do you recall that there was a smaller case of the comedian Aziz Ansari? There was
yeah.
some, yeah, okay, so you do remember that, right? Like, there was a very informal essay that was just published online, kind of like on a glorified like blog website. It wasn't even like a proper news outlet, that talked about this young woman who landed a date with him. Um, and she just seemed really uncomfortable. I guess he was just making a lot of passes that she wasn't comfortable with. And then she ended up, you know, up and leaving. And I remember the uproar that there were. This is really like, this is like the meat of the issue that I love to get into, because this is, again, it's the day to day, because not often are you dealing with the monster that is like Harvey Weinstein, because everything Weinstein did, I mean, it was black and white, wrong,
It was
wrong, wrong.
pretty clear. Yeah, clear
It was
wrong.
super clear. I mean, it was the drugging, it was the rape, it was like things that, like, come
Yeah.
on, man. Like 1 + 1 = 2. You know
Like
what I
a
mean?
Bill Cosby type of thing.
Well, Cosby too, where it was like it was chronic, there was a pattern, it's criminal. I mean, you could take it to court,
Mhm.
absolutely. But what I found most fascinating was to discuss the case of Aziz Ansari because we encounter many more Aziz Ansaris in our lives than we do Harvey Weinstein's.
It's not clear. Yeah, sometimes it's gray. It might be gray, harder to pin down.
And so I remember really analyzing that experience. Like in my op-ed, I had written that um, it's just we have to talk about it's those everyday experiences that may not be qualified for like legal litigation. They don't meet the burden of proof to like take it to court or take it even,
Mhm.
to the court of public opinion, but that it does contribute, like it's because like you said, rape culture is not
Yeah.
this like black and white binary. It's more
No, you
like,
have like microaggressions. Like
yeah.
sometimes you have micro level stuff. It's hard to
Mhm.
pin down.
It's more like a spectrum, right? Because for example, it's like you said, it's like here's microaggressions and then here's racism. Like
Mm.
it's not just this stark either it's a microaggression or either it's racism. It's usually like it goes
Part of a whole
white,
whole
like,
cycle.
yeah, white to greater black, right? Like that's really what you're looking at. So I think digging into that issue with like Aziz Ansari is that there is a very frustrating part of our like sex and dating culture where if you are with someone in an intimate context and you take things just right up to that point where it's like mostly consensual, but then you try to push the envelope and then you come back. You try to push the envelope and then you come
Mhm.
back. Like it is a very frustrating culture where just because it's not criminal doesn't mean that it's wrong. Like I remember very specifically in that excerpt, it was saying how he was just making certain advances to take things sexually in a way that she wasn't like ready for, and that
Mhm.
she had to turn him down like several times, like 2, 3, 4 times. Like you would,
Mhm.
so I would
Yeah,
like to
not
think
getting
that like,
arrested.
bro, after the second time, that's it, cut it out. Like
Yeah,
the woman doesn't want it.
yeah,
It's that culture of like of wearing someone down to the point where
yeah,
they just don't have the resistance or like okay whatever. So it's like it is, you can say it's a consent, but it's one that is achieved by slight
kind of
coercion,
wearing you out. Yeah, like
like
because I think
wow.
that's where the kind of rape culture comes from. Is
Mhm.
if the guy is persistent, he can actually get make something happen that's consensual. But then people
Right.
won't
And
think
what we
it
see,
won't actually won't take the woman's position because they'll say, "Well, why was she there? Why did she allow him to?" Then her character starts putting the question, and it's not like the black and white, you know,
no, no, of
clear
course
that
not.
somebody totally went
Oh
there
my
is to it.
goodness, of course
It's
not.
hard
Because
to pin down, but you know it when you feel it, right? You feel that it doesn't feel right,
that
and
it
then it's
doesn't feel
hard
right.
to express
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
So that was the point that I really wanted to drive home, is that like that we need to talk about that. We need to discourage men or women, because both both in any genders are capable of pushing someone
yeah,
past a certain limit or wearing someone down. That like if someone rejects you already like twice in a row, cut it out. Okay, like that's it. Try to have a conversation
yeah.
about
It's
it.
done. No is
Um,
no.
like just it's and a no doesn't have to be like a full throated legally no, like it can
Hmm.
be pushing someone away, it can be clamming up, it can be like we have to talk about body language. That's why I love that now in today's culture in regards to like kids, kids education, like I noticed that there's a lot more emphasis on teaching kids like bodily consent. If you don't want to be touched, like kids as early as
Hmm.
3 are being taught to say no, I don't want to kiss right now, I don't want to hug right now. Those are, I mean, I was not taught that. I'm a child of the 90s,
Yeah,
and that's something that we simply like, even for my generation, we didn't come across. And, when I have kids, I would love to sit down with them and teach them, even if you don't want to kiss from me, that's fine. Like you tell me, oh, I don't want this right now. Or when you do this, that lets
yeah.
me know that you don't, like that you get people to connect
I
with
think
their
one of the
bodies and
yeah,
yeah, their intuition like a lot sooner than what many of us have been encouraged or not encouraged to do. And then also just in regards to, I remember like the case of Aziz Ansari, it was, just also getting into the power dynamics. Like she was also really, I mean, she was like 23 and he was in his early 30s. So when you
mhm,
have, granted, 10 years it doesn't have to be a lot, depending on, if like 30 to 40, it's not that bad. 40 to 50, like it becomes more irrelevant over time. But early 20s and then early 30s, there is a world of difference in between. I mean, your early 20s is really,
Yeah, the big difference. Yeah,
it's an extension of your adolescence. Like, yes, you are an adult and you do have adult
you're still
responsibilities, but
developing. Yeah,
you still have the
yeah, you're
maturity of a
still
teenager.
developing your mind.
Yeah. And like, granted, you can be
Yeah.
a very mature teenager. I'm not discounting that. But even, what is the experience of being a teenager is that you're still building up experience for all of your wisdom and your maturity. Like, there's just things that you have not gone through that you don't know how to deal with them until they've happened. So, to have her be so young and him already this like established big star, she's just a fan. There was a lot that
Mhm.
was really like divided in that whole interaction.
Yes,
And
kind of like
so it's really
that group,
getting
it's like
into,
rock star
yeah,
kind of behavior, where they would have underage women. In the whole rock era, there's a lot of famous musicians that ran into statutory rape issues because that was the tendency of the scene, right?
yeah,
You got all these 16-year-old, 15-year-old women going crazy over these big rock stars, and the idea was, oh well, that's not a problem, but it is a problem. I mean, now people are going back and bringing cases against a lot of stars from the '70s because in the '70s, the other problem was is like the alcoholism and the drug abuse, allows to get things to
right,
happen that shouldn't happen, right? So they there was a lot of in the '70s of using substances and not kind of wearing people down by being high and being drunk and not being in total control, and having people who are more nefarious take control of that situation.
right, yeah,
And
absolutely.
now
And so
today
it's
people are kind of not to
there's
be
more like
in
a
that
pinch of,
state as much. Maybe, maybe not.
because now the problem, I think like for example with the proliferation of social media, right, is that because now like the press and journalistic institutions have become democratized, like for better or for worse. That's a whole different conversation to get into. But the fact is that everyone has a megaphone now. So it's really easy to
Hmm.
go on like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, what have you, and say, hey, like I was, touched up by X celebrity, X rock star, whatever. And then your clip goes, your tweet, your clip, whatever, it just goes viral. Like there are many more sources of scrutiny now. And I think certainly like, because again, if morality alone is not going to deter someone from committing a crime, like sexual harassment, sexual assault, well, then I hope the deterrence is public humiliation. Like for me, I mean, you got to hit them where it hurts, whether it's their pocketbook, their reputation. Like you have to do what works. It
Hmm.
is what it is. Um, and again, like going through due process, like giving people a chance to air, what happened, that an investigation ensues. But just the fact that those are avenues that are, hopefully much more open now than they were like in decades or even years past, like that is really like that is the goal of what I've achieved so far and what I would still like to achieve, just raising that awareness and and awareness, not just for awareness sake, but like what are action steps that you can take, like what are resources that you can go to, that were profoundly helpful for me and other, activists on the scene, especially at the very beginning of this, conversation that has turned very much mainstream, very much like institutional now. Um, like it has achieved a decent amount, but there's still so much more ground to cover as well.
Social media is like a lot of independent, well, a lot of like musicians today are held to a higher
Mhm.
standard where in the past, right, you had to go to the police department, you had to go, maybe go to newspaper, maybe they're not going to hear the story. Now you could go on Instagram, you could go on Twitter, you could go on Facebook, you can go all these places. And I've seen people get taken down because they actually, are credible reports on social media. And then now places like Pitchfork and Rolling Stone will actually run it because they'll actually
Right.
say, hey, we've got a lot of reports that this rock star has 30 women that are saying the same thing. Like he's doing the same behavior to like these 30 women that have had an experience with him,
That's
and
why
it's
I would
incredible.
say, and
And
it
now,
is important to talk about. I do not shy away from it. Like false reports, as rare as they, again, statistically speaking, as rare as they may be, they do exist.
Yeah, that can
So
happen.
if you are if you are feeling any kind of doubt about an allegation that comes out, just my personal rule of thumb is exactly as you said, numbers will usually tell a story.
Tell the
When
story,
there are
definitely.
multiple people that are coming out with a very similar story, there is a pattern, there are targets, there are, that usually, because why would multiple people who don't even in all likelihood may not even know each other,
Know each other.
it's like, do you understand
Yeah,
like
have
the
the same
coordination
story.
and the stake for so many people to come out
Yeah,
and,
that's not.
to put their reputation on the line, their families on the line, getting doxxed, like getting fired from their jobs for going public about allegations like that. Like for multiple people to do that, that's already asking for too much, way too
Yeah, I
much.
mean, I
So,
understand the false report, but when you have a pattern of behavior that goes
right,
across state, across like country, multiple countries, multiple states, women that don't know each other, never ever met each other, have the same story, and they tell the person from Pitchfork or Rolling Stone or New York Times, or they tell like a Twitter editor, or whatever, the blogger editor, hey, and then people are like, wow, that seems like there's something to that, and then
yes,
you actually get apologies from these people because they admit it. So I'm going to rehab or I'm going to counseling, and then so at least power there where you maybe in the past they didn't have the power to actually expose somebody or even get them to admit it.
right. Right. So that's why, so I'm glad that we can have this, just again like a very sober conversation, that like, yes, like false reports, they can exist, they do exist, but that being said, like it's just like they are so few and far in between that usually my first instinct is that when someone comes out with a story in regards to, just like a sexual assault, a sexual harassment, um my instinct is generally to believe them, to hold space for the story, and to respect that it does take so much to decide to come out with something like that, to put everything on the line,
Mhm.
in an attempt to bring someone to justice. But however, that being said, um, it's always important just to hold it with a grain of salt in regards to like, is anyone else going to come out? Are there more similar stories like this?
Mhm.
Because I think like the bandwagon effect, and that's the thing. I mean, as much accountability as technological advancements like social media have been able to bring about in terms of our society and our culture, it can also create just a very dangerous kind of bandwagon effect where, without knowing all the facts, you will just take whatever elements of a story, a narrative out there, and just go running with it. So there's personally just like a respect that I have for, like, unless this was verified by, with high
Mhm.
journalistic standards, like that's why I'm very particular about media literacy as well. Like, please always refer to official news sources. Like, if you want, you know, not, I don't want to say neutral, but like as professional as possible, you want to go to Reuters, AP,
Mhm.
BBC, because anything that has a headline that makes like that just provokes, for example, like, I mean, very quick, like, media literacy tip. Any kind of headline that makes your blood want to boil, that provokes a reaction out of you, that makes you want to jump out of your chair and do something, more often
Mhm.
than not, that is just a glorified blog or an op-ed, that you
Yeah.
want to be very careful. Yeah, because again, and serious news sources, when something is biased or something comes from a more personal point of view, they will say, "Hey, okay, op-ed," and then the title, and then the author, and the rest of it.
Mhm.
But something that is just very like yellow journalism, super reactionary, very like in your face. Um, you want to be careful not to elevate that as news per se. And also, like, just my personal
Yeah,
stance,
yeah.
I like to hang back and kind of and see what the reactions are and see where things are trending.
Yeah, I see
Um,
if you get more evidence-based, journalism.
Mhm.
Like,
Yes.
with but just the problem with the social media is like anybody could go out and kinda put a scarlet letter on somebody without any actual real journalistic proof, and then you don't wanna do that to somebody if it's not legitimate, but, so.
Right. And also, and the issue is that, like, something else, that comes to mind is that, like, a lot of legit, and I think that the issue with a lot of like disinformation overall, whether it comes to allegations or just anything else like that we talk about at large, a lot of, legitimate news sources are also put behind a paywall. And that's a problem, is that when you have a lot of
Mhm.
misinformation that is publish for free that you can access for, or I don't know, publish for free, but for sure you can access for free. But if you wanted to
Yeah,
read, for example,
you
the
have to
Atlantic,
pay.
Washington Post,
New York Times.
you
Yeah, you got to
pay.
pay.
And so that is a barrier towards accessing, like I
That's
say, like
true.
I have a budget, like I pay for New York Times, Washington Post, the Atlantic, Financial
Hmm.
Times, like all that. But not, sometimes like 17 to $20 a month can be the difference between, let's say, a newspaper subscription or like lunch or utilities. You know what I mean? So I would like to think
Yeah,
that moving
yeah, yeah.
forward, like, how do we democratize access to not just news overall? Because I think, as we've seen, like um, the algorithm tends to lead you to where there's more clickbait, therefore potentially more misinformation or just bad information. But like,
Or
how
sensationalism. Yeah, yeah,
right. Yeah, and especially with something very delicate, for example, like women's empowerment, sexual assault, you want to just make sure that you're getting good, solid news that is researched and not just, trash from like a blog. How do we promote access to legitimate news? I think that's the next, like, now that social media and the internet has taken us to a place where we have access to news, whether it's true or not is a different conversation. But I
yeah,
think the
yeah.
next
It's a
frontier
whole
will
nother
be
thing. Yeah.
the next frontier will
So
be how can we
how do you
lower
get like free
how to lower the barriers
the
to
cost
actual
of it?
news.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because if you have to do it the paywall, not everybody wants to do that. Yeah, I know that some people have built algorithms to get. There's some people have built some tools to get to not have to go through the paywall to get legitimate journalistic stuff. But I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Is just the use of the internet and how democratic or how much free access is really
Right.
there. But we live in a capitalist world, so you have to monetize everything. So that's the way things go. And so, yeah, how do you get journalistic integrity, but not always have to pay for it? And that's a debate to figure out how we get that type of information to people, so they're not just getting clickbait, not just getting sensationalism for free
Mhm.
because, oh, well, I don't want to pay, and then the rumor mill just going all over the world with stuff that's not real.
Exactly. Yeah, and that can really, again, like, like from your perspective, from like, say, like the Black Civil Rights movement, from like the women's empowerment movement, like how does the current conditions, how do they hurt rather than help us? Because that's what I find is that, again, it's that uneven progress where, like, in some ways we're able to connect with so many people more than ever before and really be able to reach people with more resources, with more stories, with more community. But at the same time, there can be so much noise to sift through,
Yeah, yeah.
that it does require a very sharp, keen eye. And it's one of those cases where like technology has advanced so much farther than like the skills to interact with it, at like a very macro scale. So I love that we're talking about this because that's super, super relevant.
Well, one thing I've been very concerned about lately is, and I get into politics, but I'm a liberal and I'm an African
Mhm.
American. What we've seen lately is to try to like weaponization of African American culture to say it's woke, so you
Mhm.
don't need
Mhm.
to know about it, right?
I'm in
So
Florida,
so if
so
you ban
unfortunately, we are
you
ground
ban a
zero.
book about Rosa Parks. Yeah, you ban
Yeah.
a book about Rosa Parks and says that's damaging to the other person because maybe the black kids will get upset and that threatens the white kid. And I'm like, really? That's a lot of what ifs to ban a book. And the same thing kind of goes toward issues that are like feminist or issues that are for like gay people, and then people are able to kind of reverse progress by eliminating knowledge, and there's a practice of like getting books they don't like or
Right.
ideas they don't like out of
Mhm.
libraries, out of schools, and then if you limit knowledge, how can people be informed to actually do something, to have a reasonable worldview if they're given limited resources? If you start limiting what the kids can get in the library, what they can get in college in terms of courses, how are they going to have an open mind?
Exactly. I mean, so I mean, I'm in Florida, so this is ground zero for all of that. Unfortunately, this is something that, I'm just living in the headlines and to an extent in real life day to day. Absolutely. Again, you're not creating a culture of critical thinking, of being able to engage with a multitude of viewpoints, with good faith, and being able to formulate your own opinion based on having access to all the facts. You're just creating a culture of censorship and fear where, God forbid, you bring up something that, again, it's like you said, I love how you said it, so simple but so profound. Those are too many what ifs to be banning books, to be banning certain things, like too many very specific hypothetical situations that are likely not realistic. It's like the whole hysteria over like the trans population, like, oh God, it's like they're just drugging kids up with like puberty blockers, and doctors are just going wild trying to convert kids. It's like, do you understand the effort it takes for like one kid to even declare, hey, I think I might not be the gender that, was assigned to me.
Mhm.
And then having to go through psychologists, having to go to the doctor. The doctor then has to okay whether they go on, the blockers or not. And then maybe later, like those are
Yeah,
situations those are so many hoops to jump through that it's not this thing, this phenomenon being unleashed onto kids like a wave. These are
yeah.
very,
They're trying
very,
to turn people into monsters. It's like the monsters on Maple Street, like Rod Serling episodes. Like she's going to take the fear. Fear is so dangerous because
yes.
you you look, all societal ills are because of the other, and they're somebody with dreads, somebody looks like
Mhm.
me, somebody that's like where that's a cross dresser, somebody that's in drag, somebody's so then they're the responsible for why you don't feel good and you're not doing well. You put it all on them, and we've seen this happen many times in many type of errors, and it's very dangerous to do that, but because it's easy to put everything on somebody else and not look at yourself critically. And that I think is a dangerous thing. And it affects all people because when you get a mindset that it's always this other person that's causing the trouble and
Mhm, mhm.
you gotta restrict them, then it's gonna naturally go toward like ethnic groups, women, other people, certain, you're short, you're tall. He's like, you're gonna come up with all kinds of criteria to make yourself feel better.
Yes, exactly. It's because fear has no shape, and that's the worst part of it, is that you can mold it into whatever it is that you want and create this hysteria over something that may not even be true, or true but not in the way that you think it is. Um Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's why working in this space, it is so critical to be extremely clear as to what your objectives are, what your goals are, what your boundaries are, also what you're not about. Like that's why just, I always say in as not neutral, but like nonpartisan, non-charged language as much as possible. Like, listen, I'm not here to make enemies of men. I'm not here to make lives impossible for women. I'm not here to, it's like, I'm just here using my voice within my sphere of influence. I just want to make sure that we're all living and working and interacting with each other in reasonably safe spaces. I'm not looking to take away any kind of fun. I'm not looking to take away any kind of, um, just like human interactions with each other. Like, I'm just like, can we do this in a way that is respectful at the barest minimum? That is it.
Yeah, I mean, you get a mindset where it's like kind of, oh, they just tag people and say, well, you're like Nancy Pelosi or you're like Hillary Clinton, right?
Oh my
And then
gosh, yes.
immediately they they put you in the mindset where suddenly, if you say what you're saying, somebody in that on some other side says, well, she's talking like a Hillary Clinton or she's talking like Nancy Pelosi, so they automatically negate everything that you just
Everything.
said. Don't listen to one
Even
word
though
and
you're
put you in
saying
that
the
box.
sky, exactly. You're saying the sky is blue. The sky is blue. The sky, but because it's Nancy Pelosi saying it, no, cannot be right. The sky is blue. Whether Nancy Pelosi says it, whether Donald
Yeah,
Trump
it's
says it,
blue.
it's like the sky's blue.
Yeah, that's a problem. It's like when you get into these camps, then you can't. People just get put into these categories, and suddenly, like if you, it used to be like, oh, well, if you said something about George Floyd, you're BLM, but now it's expanded that if you talk about Medgar Evers, you're woke. If you talk about Rosa
Mhm.
Parks, you're woke, and
Oh
it
my god.
gone beyond talking about like like a George Floyd. Now, if you talk about any kind of civil rights thing, oh, that should be banned. and so that's gone way beyond. So it's like the problem, like I see, like so you could be talking about like women should be respected, and suddenly you get put in the category where you're an activist, and then
Mhm.
if you're an activist, well, we don't want to hear you, and we're not going to actually listen to anything you say because suddenly because now you're an activist.
Therefore, what you're bringing up is like it's bad, it's distracting, you're trying to silence people. It's like, no, as an activist, I'm just trying to give a voice to X issue. I'm not here to censor anybody. I'm just here to say, we have a problem. This is it. These are the solutions. These are the proposed solutions. Let's have a conversation about it. Like that's what I define activism is exactly by that. I am
Mhm.
here with a voice to a problem and to prescribe solutions. And hopefully between the public sector, the private sector, and anything else in between, can we work towards that solution?
Well, that's why I hope people would have a more holistic point of view. Like
Mm,
I'm tend to be in the camp of like let somebody speak. Don't
yeah.
like interrupt and then start pitching your like a lot of people sometimes they come from this kind of mindset. They hear one word, it triggers them, and then they
Hmm.
don't hear anything else. Right?
Hmm.
Where you like let somebody actually speak their full, complete thought.
Yeah.
Listen to them, give them the respect of listening to what they have to say. Right. And just
Mhm.
don't totally just the whole time they're talking, all you're thinking about is your response and not hearing anything they say.
Exactly. Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I'm sorry, but like I do have another podcast at 9
Of
o'clock. I
course. Of
kind of booked
course.
this too close. But I really I think we had a great conversation. I think it's very useful for people to understand the perspective of somebody that is yourself
Yeah.
involved at the very beginning of the Me Too movement, and we're still here. There's still a reason to be active for rights for all people, especially women who are in a marginalized group and not
Mhm.
respected. And I totally understand what you're doing, and I think people should check out your LinkedIn. Again, I'm
Thank
going to repeat it. Go to
you.
linkedin.com/in/Ibis Valdez and check that out. And please click it. It will be clickable when this is fully published. And when people go there, they can sign up to talk to you for what can they do there. They can
So yeah, so
communicate with
again,
you
you
or
like let's chat over LinkedIn, or you can email me. We can set up a conversation. Again, like let's connect. If there's something that we can collaborate on, if you're in the South Florida area, so I'm in Miami, let's talk. So, if you're interested in any of what I've talked about or anything else that you would like to bring up, by all means, I'm all ears.
well, that's great. Well, thank you again. This will be fully published on all major podcast platforms by tomorrow. It is now fully there on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So people could go out there on my channels and find it. I think I sent you those links, but it will be fully published everywhere that podcast are listened to or watched tomorrow. So thank you again for being a
Wonderful.
guest
No,
on the Family Go Show. Have a great night.
likewise. Thank you.